Imagine this. Your boss looks you straight in the eye and says, "Your services are no longer required, no paperwork, no warning, nothing." Just like that, 7 months of loyalty and hard work thrown away. But instead of breaking down, you smile and tell him, "This isn't over." That's the moment everything changes, because what happens next is one of the most satisfying acts of revenge I've ever witnessed. My name is Lucia, and for most of my career I've lived by one very simple rule: work hard, and people will respect you. That belief carried me through school, through my first few odd jobs, and right into the world of digital marketing, copywriting, SEO, social media management, all that fun behind-the-scenes stuff that keeps a business relevant online. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't political. I wasn't the type to step on others just to climb higher. I figured if I did the work, if I delivered results, the rest would take care of itself. Oh, how naive I was. Because a few years ago, I learned the hard way that hard work doesn't mean anything when you're dealing with people who have no shame, no ethics, and no respect for the very laws meant to protect workers. This is the story of how my ex-boss, a man who thought he could exploit me and discard me like trash, ended up begging to pay me thousands just to keep me quiet. But before we get to that very satisfying ending, let me take you back to where it all began. It started with what looked like a dream opportunity. A well-known Italian company, I won't name them directly, but trust me, if you live here, you've heard of them, needed a copywriter and social media manager. A steady role. Big clients. Exposure. Connections. I went through the interview process, and it wasn't long before I met the 2 men who ran the show. First, there was the big boss. The general manager. The kind of man who walked into a room and expected everyone else to stop breathing. He wasn't loud, not exactly, but he carried himself with this aura of arrogance. His smile was never warm, it was smug. Like he knew he owned the place, and by extension, everyone in it. And then there was the mini-boss. His right-hand man, his little shadow. If Big Boss was the king, Mini-Boss was the crown prince nobody actually respected, but everyone had to pretend to. He was younger, slicker, always fiddling with his phone, always eager to parrot whatever Big Boss had just said 5 seconds earlier. They talked about the role, about how important it was, about how they needed someone reliable who could keep everything running smoothly online. And honestly, it sounded perfect. But then came the catch. They told me, very casually, that I'd need to open a VAT number, a partita IVA. Basically, instead of being a normal full-time employee, I'd work as a freelancer. Now, for those of you outside Italy, let me explain why that's shady. Opening a VAT number means you're technically self-employed. You pay your own taxes, your own health contributions, everything. But these 2 men weren't actually hiring me as a freelancer. They wanted me to work exclusively for them, full-time hours, every week, just like an employee, but without giving me any of the rights or protections an employee deserves. No benefits. No job security. No safety net. And I knew it wasn't fair. I even told them, point blank, this doesn't sound like a real freelance arrangement. You want me full-time, so why not just hire me properly? Big Boss smiled that smug little smile and said, "Don't worry. Through us, you'll find more connections. This will open doors for you." Spoiler alert, it did not open doors. But at the time, I needed the work. So I swallowed my doubts, signed the papers, and told myself it was temporary. From day one, I threw myself into the job. I managed their SEO, researching keywords, rewriting web copy, making sure their sites ranked. I handled their social media, posting updates, responding to comments, crafting campaigns. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, glued to my laptop. And I did it well. Clients were happy. Campaigns performed. Deadlines were never missed. I received emails and messages full of praise from customers, from partners, even occasionally from the bosses themselves. I thought, maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe if I just keep proving myself, they'll see my value and bring me on as a real employee one day. But then there were the others. Remember Big Boss and Mini Boss? Well, they each had their little companions. Big Boss had a mistress. Mini Boss had a girlfriend. And both of these women were employed at the company. I put employed in quotes because, let's be real, Neither of them was there to actually work. They were hopeless at their jobs. They made constant mistakes, dumped tasks on everyone else, and when things went wrong, guess who had to clean up the mess? Yep. Me. And the worst part? They knew it. They knew they could slack off, they knew they could let things fall apart, and nothing would happen to them because their positions weren't earned. They were guaranteed. It drove me insane. I wasn't shy about my opinion, either. I didn't scream or cause drama, but I didn't hide my frustration when their screw-ups doubled my workload. And of course, that didn't exactly endear me to management. I mean, who wants the honest worker pointing out that the emperor's new clothes are, in fact, invisible? 7 months. That's how long I lasted. 7 months of working full-time without the protections of a full-time contract. 7 months of cleaning up after the incompetent favorites. 7 months of telling myself, just hold on, it'll get better, they'll recognize your value. But deep down, I think I always knew better. Because when you work in a place that's built on favoritism, corruption, and arrogance, the hard-working people don't get rewarded. They get chewed up and spat out. And sure enough, one day, mini-boss called me into his office. No paperwork. No written notice, which, by the way, is 100% illegal. Just him, sitting there with that fake serious expression. He looked at me and said the words I'll never forget, "Your services are no longer required." Just like that. I sat there for a moment, stunned. My heart pounded. My palms went cold. But then, something strange happened. Instead of breaking down or begging, I felt this calmness wash over me. Like a storm had been brewing inside me for months, and now that it finally broke, I knew exactly what I had to do. I looked him right in the eye and said, with the calmest smile I could manage, "This isn't over." Mini-boss's face twitched. His eyes widened just a little. "Are you threatening the company?" he asked. I leaned forward slightly and replied, "Threats are for people who aren't sure they'll win. I'm making a promise. It's just a matter of time." And with that, I walked out. No tears. No begging. Just a quiet fire burning inside me. Because in that moment, I knew something they didn't. They thought they had the power. They thought I'd just disappear, another exploited freelancer with no recourse. But I knew the law was on my side. And I was about to use it. Walking out of that office, I should have felt crushed. After all, my entire livelihood had just been ripped away illegally, unceremoniously, like I was disposable. But strangely, I didn't feel broken. I felt focused. Because when Mini-Boss dismissed me with those smug words, "Your services are no longer required," something clicked inside me. I realized they hadn't just fired me. They'd handed me the perfect weapon. Of course, reality hit fast. No job meant no income. My VAT number still meant bills, taxes, and fees. Italy's bureaucracy isn't forgiving, and self-employed workers often drown in red tape. The first week after being fired, I felt the pressure hard. I lay awake at night calculating how many months of rent I had left in my savings. I picked at simple dinners, pasta, tomato sauce, bread, while my stomach churned with both hunger and stress. But beneath the fear, there was another feeling building: anger. Not the hot, reckless kind. The cold kind. The kind that sharpens your focus. The kind that whispers, "They don't get to do this to you. Not this time." So I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and called someone I trusted, my lawyer. Sitting across from my lawyer a few days later, I laid everything out. The fake freelance arrangement. The full-time schedule. The lack of benefits. The illegal firing with no notice, no paperwork. The toxic workplace culture. He listened carefully, occasionally raising his eyebrows, occasionally jotting notes. When I finished, he leaned back and said the words I'd been desperate to hear: "Lucia, this is a classic case of wrongful termination and labor law violation. They're in deep trouble. And you've got a strong case." For the first time in days, I exhaled. But he wasn't done. "What makes this even better is the evidence. You've kept your emails, your chats, your invoices, right?" Oh, did I ever? I'd always been meticulous. Every task, every request, Every urgent email from management, I had it all saved. Years of habit turned into a goldmine of proof. Good, my lawyer said, tapping his pen against the table. Because when we move, we're going to move hard. The first step was sending them an official communication. A lawyer's letter, formal, legal, undeniable. In it, my lawyer detailed the violations, forcing me into a partita IVA while treating me as a full-time employee. Denying me benefits and protections guaranteed by law. Firing me without written notice, which was flat out illegal. We demanded compensation. It was firm, professional, respectful. But here's the thing about arrogant men who think they're untouchable: respect doesn't register. They see professionalism as weakness. And in their overconfidence, they make mistakes. Oh, and did Big Boss ever make a mistake? A week later, my lawyer forwarded me their reply. But instead of a carefully crafted response from their legal team, it was an email. From Big Boss himself. And not just any email. A meltdown. It was long. Rambling. Full of insults. He called me ungrateful. Incompetent. He accused me of sabotaging the company. He even took cheap personal shots, mocking me for being just a freelancer who should have been grateful for the opportunity. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through line after line of bile, my jaw dropping lower with every paragraph. I finally looked up at my lawyer, half laughing, half stunned. "Is this good for us?" He grinned. "Lucia, this is a gift." He just handed us written evidence of his hostility, his lack of professionalism, and his acknowledgement of your employment situation. Judges love this stuff. He dug his own grave. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. "So basically," I said, "he wrote me a love letter of self-destruction?" "Exactly," my lawyer said. "Frame it. Print it. Cherish it." From there, things became meticulous. Methodical. Every evening, I'd sit down at my desk with a cup of tea, open my laptop, and dive into my files. I pulled old emails. Screenshots of chats. PDFs of invoices. Notes from meetings. Even photos I'd snapped in the office, the kind of small, seemingly irrelevant details that now painted a vivid picture of exploitation. It was exhausting. Hours and hours of sorting, organizing, cross-referencing. But with every document I added to the growing pile, I felt stronger. This wasn't just paperwork. This was armor. This was ammunition. This was justice being built, piece by piece. At times, doubt crept in. What if the case takes years? What if they crush me financially before it even reaches trial? What if the judge doesn't care? But then I'd remember Big Boss's smug face. Mini Boss's fake concern. The mistress and girlfriend laughing off their mistakes while I cleaned up after them. And the anger would flare again, burning away the doubt. They had underestimated me. That was their first mistake. Their second was giving me the perfect evidence to prove everything. Here's the thing about Italian bureaucracy: it's slow. Painfully, agonizingly slow. Weeks turned into months. Months dragged into nearly a year. During that time, I picked up freelance gigs here and there, just enough to stay afloat. I lived frugally. I cut corners. I became intimately familiar with the cheapest produce at my local market. But while my bank account suffered, my resolve did not. Because every day that passed was one day closer to justice. One day closer to watching those arrogant men squirm. And squirm they would. See, here's the thing about people like Big Boss: they're repeat offenders. Mine wasn't the first name tied to a complaint against him. The man had a reputation, whispered stories, rumors, even a few public cases. He cut corners. He exploited workers. He thought himself untouchable. And maybe, for a long time, he had been. But this time, he'd pushed too far. My lawyer filed our 200-page dossier, yes, 200 pages of neatly organized, cross-referenced, irrefutable evidence. It was a masterpiece of documentation. We filed it right before Christmas. While everyone else was eating panettone and sipping Prosecco, Big Boss and Mini Boss were sitting down with their lawyer, staring at a mountain of proof that screamed, "You're going to lose." It didn't even take a week. Before New Year's, my lawyer got the call. Their lawyer was practically begging. "Please," he said, "name a settlement amount. My clients want to resolve this quietly. No trial." I can't describe the wave of satisfaction that hit me when my lawyer relayed that message. 4 months, I had lived with the sting of betrayal, the anxiety of unemployment, the grind of building my case. And now, the same people who had treated me like dirt were the ones bending the knee. Of course, we didn't jump at the first offer. We discussed. We strategized. And when we finally named our number, a solid 5-figure sum, they didn't even argue. They just accepted. Like a lion forced into a collar. But even with their lawyer's desperation, the official settlement hearing had to happen. That meant walking back into a courtroom, facing the men who thought they'd destroyed me. In the days leading up, my emotions tangled together: relief, anticipation, nervousness, and, yes, a dark thrill. Because I knew what they didn't. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about watching karma land its punch. This was about watching the mighty fall. And I couldn't wait. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of my closet staring at my clothes, heart racing. This wasn't just another day. This was the day. For almost a year, I'd carried the weight of betrayal, anger, and uncertainty. I'd lived frugally, fought bureaucracy, and built a case that consumed every ounce of energy. And now, here it was, the final act. I chose a simple but sharp outfit, a fitted black blazer, clean white blouse, trousers pressed within an inch of their life. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just professional, strong, unshakable. Because today wasn't about making noise. It was about showing up calm, prepared, and undeniable. Walking into the courthouse felt surreal. The marble floors echoed under my shoes. Lawyers hustled past with stacks of files, clerks shuffled papers, the air buzzed with tension. I spotted my lawyer by the steps, his expression calm but eyes sharp. He greeted me with a nod. "You ready?" he asked. I swallowed, feeling my throat dry. More than ready. We walked together toward the chamber. And that's when I saw them. Big Boss. Mini Boss. And trailing just behind, their ever-loyal companions, the mistress and the girlfriend, both dressed far more for a night out than a legal proceeding. The sight of them stopped me cold for half a second. Big Boss's smugness was still there, but under it, I could see something new: tension. His jaw clenched tighter, his eyes darted more than usual. Mini Boss looked pale, his confidence clearly cracked. It hit me then, for the first time, they weren't in control. I straightened my shoulders and walked past them without a word. Court hearings aren't like movies. There's no instant drama, no judge banging the gavel the second you walk in. You sit. You wait. You feel the clock drag. But that wait was delicious. Because I could feel their eyes on me, could sense their discomfort building with every tick of the clock. At one point, Mini Boss leaned toward Big Boss and whispered something, his voice just loud enough for me to catch a few words. "Maybe we should've," before cutting off. Maybe they should've what? Treated me like a human being? Followed the law? Not written that email dripping with insults? Too late now. Finally, the clerk announced the judge, and we all rose. She entered briskly, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. I'd heard whispers about her reputation: tough, fair, and utterly unimpressed by theatrics. Perfect. We sat as she adjusted her papers. My lawyer stood, outlining our case briefly: wrongful termination, misclassification of employment, lack of benefits, illegal dismissal without notice. He referenced the dossier, 200 pages of pure, undeniable proof. Then, their lawyer spoke. His voice trembled ever so slightly as he tried to downplay, to deflect, to paint me as just a freelancer who misunderstood the arrangement. But the judge cut him off mid-sentence. "Counsel," she said, her tone sharp as glass, "we're not here to insult anyone's intelligence. I've reviewed the file. The evidence is overwhelming." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Then came the part I'll never forget. The judge turned to Big Boss directly. Her eyes locked on him, unflinching. "Mr. Name redacted," she said, "your conduct is appalling. We see your name in this court far too often, and frankly, we are tired of it. You could have heard a pin drop. Big Boss's face went scarlet. He shifted in his chair, opened his mouth, then closed it again like a fish gasping for air. The judge continued, exploiting workers, ignoring contracts, dismissing them without notice. This pattern is unacceptable. This court will not tolerate it. Mini Boss shrank into his seat, eyes glued to the floor. The mistress fidgeted with her nails. The girlfriend crossed her arms tight across her chest. And me. I sat tall, steady, savoring every word. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about public shame. This was about power finally being put in its place. After the judge's reprimand, the rest was almost anticlimactic. Their lawyer, now sweating visibly, confirmed they had accepted the settlement terms. A 5-figure sum, not millions, but more than enough to validate everything I'd gone through. Enough to prove I wasn't powerless. The judge signed off, congratulating my lawyer on the thoroughness of the case. Then, to my surprise, she turned to me. "Well done," she said. "It's rare we see someone document so carefully. You've done a service to yourself and, frankly, to the court." My throat tightened. I nodded, managing a quiet, "Thank you, Your Honor." And just like that, it was over. Leaving the chamber, I caught one last glimpse of my ex-bosses. Big Boss stormed out first, muttering curses under his breath, his mistress tottering behind him on heels far too high for marble floors. Mini Boss trailed after, his face pale, his girlfriend trying to comfort him with a hand on his arm. But no amount of hand-holding could erase the humiliation stamped across his face. For once, their arrogance had cost them. And they knew it. Outside, the winter air bit at my cheeks. I stood on the courthouse steps, inhaling deeply, watching my breath cloud in front of me. It was over. A year of struggle, of uncertainty, of grinding through paperwork and doubt, finished. The weight I'd been carrying for so long slipped off my shoulders. My chest felt lighter. My hands steadied. I turned to my lawyer, who was already tucking his papers away. "So, drinks on me?" I joked weakly. He chuckled. "I'd say they're on your ex-boss, technically." We laughed, a sound that felt freer than anything I'd managed in months. On the train ride home, I stared out the window as fields blurred past. My phone buzzed with messages from friends who had known about the case, all of them cheering, congratulating, celebrating with me from afar. But more than anything, I thought about the lesson. For months, those men had made me feel powerless, disposable, small. But in the end, it wasn't their arrogance that defined me. It was my persistence. My refusal to let them get away with it. My willingness to fight, even when the system was slow and the odds felt heavy. And maybe most satisfying of all, they hadn't just lost money. They'd lost face. In front of a judge. In front of their peers. And that humiliation would follow them far longer than the dent in their bank account. Because money can be earned back. Reputation? That scar stays. When I stepped off that train and walked through my city streets, everything felt different. The same buildings stood where they always had. The same cafes hummed with conversation. The same narrow cobblestones stretched under my feet. But the weight pressing down on me for nearly a year was gone. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving. I was free. People expect revenge to feel loud, fireworks, champagne, confetti. But in truth, it felt quiet. Satisfyingly quiet. The kind of quiet where you sit in your living room, take off your shoes, sink into the couch, and finally exhale without that knot in your chest. Of course, there was money. The 5-figure settlement arrived a few weeks later, crisp numbers on a bank statement that made my eyes water with relief. Bills were paid. My fridge filled again. I even treated myself to something small but symbolic, a new leather-bound planner. Because if there's one thing I learned through all of this, it's that planning, documenting, and persistence are powerful weapons. But the true victory wasn't financial. It was emotional. Those men had wanted me powerless. They'd wanted me silent. Instead, I'd stood up, fought back, and forced them to face consequences they thought they were immune to. Word travels fast in business circles, faster than people realize. I never made a public statement. I didn't need to. But quietly, subtly, People started asking questions. Potential clients who once saw Big Boss's company as untouchable began whispering, "Did you hear about that lawsuit? Did you hear they had to settle again?" Italy is a small country in some ways. Industries overlap, reputations linger. And while I can't say my case destroyed their empire, I can say this: the cracks widened. Deals slipped through their fingers. Talented workers avoided their offers. And slowly but surely, the shiny veneer they had built around themselves dulled. It turns out, when a leopard refuses to change its spots, people eventually stop pretending it's harmless. But the most important ripple wasn't theirs. It was mine. When you go through something like this, when you're exploited, humiliated, discarded, it scars you. For a long time, I carried shame. I wondered if I'd been stupid to accept the contract. If I'd been weak to endure their treatment for 7 months. But sitting on my balcony one evening, sipping espresso with the spring air brushing against my face, I realized something profound: I wasn't weak. I was resilient. Weakness would have been staying silent. Weakness would have been walking away without a fight. Strength was gathering every scrap of evidence. Strength was waiting out the slow wheels of justice. Strength was walking into that courtroom with my head high, knowing the truth was on my side. And that realization changed me. From then on, I carried myself differently. Not arrogant like Big Boss. Not spineless like Mini Boss. But steady. Rooted. Knowing that no matter what, I had already proven I could stand my ground. Looking back, there are a few lessons I carry with me, lessons I want anyone listening to hear loud and clear. Document everything. Every email, every chat, every invoice. You never know when the smallest piece of evidence will become the linchpin of your case. Never confuse silence with weakness. When I told Mini Boss, "This isn't over," he thought it was an empty threat. What he didn't understand was that silence is often strategy. Karma works best with a little push. People say karma is automatic, but in reality, sometimes you have to hand-deliver it. My bosses would still be exploiting people today if I hadn't taken action. Respect matters. Respect isn't about titles or money. It's about how you treat the people around you. Big Boss had money, power, connections, but no respect. And in the end, that's what undid him. People often ask me, what was the most satisfying part? The money. The judge's words. Seeing their faces in court. Honestly, it was one simple moment. When the judge leaned forward, eyes locked on Big Boss, and said, "We're honestly tired of seeing your name in court." That was it. Because in that instant, I realized it wasn't just me. I wasn't alone. Others had suffered at his hands. Others had fought back. And now, I was part of that chorus of voices holding him accountable. And the fact that it came from a judge, the highest authority in that room, made it undeniable. Public. Permanent. That was sweeter than any paycheck. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. But it did become mine again. I found new clients, real ones, who valued my work and treated me with respect. I built a healthier routine, balancing freelance projects with personal growth. I even started mentoring younger freelancers, teaching them what I'd learned the hard way about contracts, rights, and boundaries. Because if my story could help even one person avoid exploitation, then maybe it wasn't just revenge. Maybe it was purpose. And every so often, when doubt creeps in or the memory of those toxic months resurfaces, I remind myself of one thing. I promised Mini Boss that day in his office, "This isn't over." And I kept that promise. So here's the truth. Revenge isn't always about grand gestures. Sometimes it's about patience. Sometimes it's about gathering your strength, biding your time, and letting your enemies hand you the rope they'll eventually hang themselves with. That's what Big Boss and Mini Boss did. Their arrogance was their undoing. And me. I didn't just win money. I won back my dignity, my voice, my power. And trust me, that's worth far more than any paycheck. If this story gave you chills, if you've ever dreamed of watching justice catch up to someone who thought they were untouchable, do me a favor, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories just like this. And tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? Because at the end of the day, these stories aren't just entertainment. They're proof that no matter how powerless someone makes you feel, justice can and will find its way back.